You're listening to Errol Parker and Clancy Overall, editors of the Betoota Advocate, on Desert Rock FM.
Welcome back to the Betoota Advocate radio show. My name's Clancy Overall. You know me by now. Today I'm joined by Effie Bateman as a co-host, our, I should say, cultural reporter, rapidly rising talent in the Betoota Advocate newsroom, already surpassed the eternal cadet Wendell Hussey, who's been with us for nearly a decade. And today we're going to interview someone who's, I guess, more... when Effie threw this idea around, I thought it was an interesting one. But yes, as I'm about to make clear throughout this interview, much more up her alley as an arts and cultural commentator and journalist than it is mine as a regional, a former stock and station agent, tent boxer turned rural journalist. Today's guest, I guess, is doing the good work, protecting the culture, creating communities, and creating bangers and spaces for us to dance. Vichara from Astral People, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, there's been some dark years for live music and music in general in this country. Melbourne obviously had the 300 days of lockdown. In the 90s, Brisbane sold all of their pubs to Woolworths and got them turned into bottle shops. Poker machines ravaged through New South Wales and effectively ended pub rock as we knew it. And then, of course, in 2014, Barry O'Farrell's lockout laws came along. You kind of popped up just before then with Astral People.
Look, we've actually been running Astral People for 12 years now, so it was actually a few years before the lockout laws came in, and I distinctly remember when they did come in and what a, I guess what a stab in the heart that was when they did come in. Like, especially as back then in those early days of Astral People, we didn't do so much live concert promoting like we do today. We were very much club promoters, And a lot of the income that we made from club nights was obviously on the door, late at night, after 1 a.m. Now, when people couldn't come into venues after that 1 or 1:30 a.m., I can't remember right now, it really killed a lot of our business. It pretty much wiped out, 50%, if not more, of our income that we would traditionally have on those nights. So, it was a really dark time, and it kind of forced us to kind of think outside the box. And, I think a reason why, I've come on the show today is to talk about, the return of our series Summer Dance. Because funnily enough, it's funny that you mentioned the lockout laws, because Summer Dance was actually created off the back of lockout laws coming in, and we had to change our setup and move to more daytime parties in Sydney.
When obviously the lockout laws came in, what did you end up pivoting into to stay afloat?
So that's when we started to get into more live concert promoting, and funnily enough, that's become the biggest side of our business. So, I mean, back then, my business partner and I were really into like hip hop and grime coming out of the UK at the time. So we decided to take a punt on some of the smaller artists at that time, and some of those smaller artists included the likes of Stormzy, Dave, AJ Tracy, who were some pretty big names at these days.
The opposite of smaller artists.
So we took a punt on those in those early days, because we were like, look, traditional club nights that are running at late, normally, from like 10 p.m. to 5 a.m. or whatever it might be, they don't work anymore in this format when people can't get into a venue after 1 or 1:30 a.m. So we kind of was like, okay, well, what else do we like at Astral People? We love doing the live stuff. We've dabbled in it previously, pre-lockdown. And we were like, look, let's keep our focus on this. So we, started bringing out those artists, and funny, luckily and through some good work over the years, we've been able to kind of build them into, I guess, megastars to the level that they're at today.
You get to be that sort of person who's like, oh, I knew this artist was going to make it. I knew before they were cool.
I don't know what it is. I think, a lot of it comes down to, I sometimes ask myself this, I'm like, it's really weird, because it's Astral People has always been like a pure reflection on Tom and I's music taste. And so for us to be just like, hey, I really like this music, I'm going to bring it to Australia. And then for other people in Australia to also like that music, and, for it to see it develop over the years. And we've done that with a few different genres over the last 12 years, to see it kind of build. And when I really think about why the core of why these artists are here, it's because literally Tom and I just like listening to this music. It's a pretty special thing that we've been able to kind of take people on this ride a little bit over the years. And I think for us as well, just believing in things from an early stage. And when we believe in it, we know how to sell it. We know how to promote it. It's like, I guess with any industry, if you believe in the product that you're selling, then, it's a lot easier to convince other people of it as well. So we found we'd be pretty good at that.
Now, we've rushed into this interview with obviously me campaigning and rallying and making noise about Australia's Puritan culture and the nanny state that has restricted your line of work, but we didn't get as far as introducing Astral People to the punters out there that might not be across your work. Can you give us an elevator pitch of what it is, how it started, and where you were 2011 when it did first come to be?
Of course. So, as you said, Tom and I started Astral People 12 years ago now. We met at Dimitri's Pizza on Crown Street, had a few meetings there. And at the time, I was doing a health science degree at uni. He was an accountant.
Oh, wow. Very different.
Obviously makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah.
And he was managing just on the side a couple of artists. I was managing a couple of artists. And he came to me with this idea of like, hey, I'm going to start this management company. We also had an old business partner at that time as well, Lee. And he came to us and he just was like, look, you've got a couple of artists that you're managing. Do you want to do this? And pretty much in my last couple of years at university, I was promoting these club nights, and it was one thing that I was really good at, getting people excited about, these artists that I was promoting, or getting people excited about these club nights that I was promoting. And I just absolutely loved it. And I just knew that my path as a physiotherapist was going to come to an end. And I basically wanted to, move into music. So when this opportunity came about, I just asked myself hey, I've got to, do I want to give this a shot? Am I going to regret it if I don't do it? The answer was yes. So I just threw everything at it. We rented a really shitty office in Rozelle, and we got things moving. And what started as predominantly an artist management company at the time quickly evolved. We realized very quickly that the artists that we were managing at the time were making absolutely no money. And therefore, we were making absolutely no money. So we had to diversify very quickly. And so I kind of then brought in my event and touring experience from pre-Astral People days, stuff that I was doing at university, brought that into the fold.
So what are we talking about here in terms of making a dollar for your artists? Would you guide them through merchandise, through what?
As a manager, you guide them through every aspect of their careers. So that's through you're guiding the booking side of things, the timelines, the release strategy, the marketing. You're kind of overseeing everything. You employ, when artists get to a certain level, then we will employ other people to come onto the project, whether it's their publicist, booking agent, record label, whoever it might be. But we're still the ones that are overseeing everything, overseeing their career strategy.
Now, I want to ask you, you're beaming with positivity, and it sounds like you're just as into this as you were when you started it. Do you ever get, when you look at the arts in Australia, do you ever get disheartened? Because we look at some of those bands that pop off, they pop off a bit more than a one-hit wonder, but you couldn't even call them that because one-hit wonders usually get commercial radio or commercial acknowledgement for at least one hit. How do you keep yourselves inspired and keep those artists inspired to keep doing what they're doing when you are effectively, in a landscape of stale, old tastemakers?
Look, that's a really interesting question. I can kind of answer it with just like a life experience that I had. So basically, for the first 4 years of Astral, Tom and myself, I think we were paying ourselves roughly about $300 a week. Ooh. And $160 a week was going to rent. So I was
in Sydney.
But that was back then when you buy, get a room in a dodgy share house in Surrey Hills for like $150.
Yeah.
Doesn't exist anymore. And I remember at that 4-year mark where we had a couple of our management clients at the time making a little bit of money. And I was like, okay, I've got to go see the world now. Like I've got a bit of money now. I'm going to go, and I thought to myself, I was like, I'm going to go to Berlin. I was really into techno at the time. Yeah. That was like the home of techno. And so I went to Berlin with this like hope of discovering, I guess, this sound and not learning more about it. But I weirdly came back with this complete life moment of just being like, hang on a second, what we have in Australia is actually so much more interest. Like I found in Berlin that every venue that I would go to would be playing more or less kind of the same sort of music. It didn't feel very new and inventive for me. And then when I came back to Australia, what I realized very quickly was what we have here is so special because we are the most isolated country in the world. Like people here don't seem to follow trends that are happening overseas as quickly as those people on that side of the world do. And I just found that to me was so inspiring. When I went over there with this mission of discovering new music or discovering new scenes, what it showed me was like, how good do we have it here? Because we're actually pushing the envelope with making music and coming up with new inventive sounds and ways of producing. And it was, if anything, I found it more inspiring to be here than ever before.
So you kind of got a good insight into like how Australians are weirdos, and we definitely can't be pigeonholed. I'd say that that there is good evidence in the history of Australian music of record labels coming here to see what the hell's going on. Tame Impala is probably a good example of that. Whatever sound was coming out of Fremantle at that time and still to this day hadn't been recreated elsewhere in the world, and definitely wasn't part of a homogenous kind of template that you're right, you do see in clubs and venues elsewhere in the world. You see people kind of conforming to a degree.
Yeah.
What would you say are some of the more unique sounds you've heard in Australia, and where do you find them? Where do they come from? Are they geographical, for the sense, we got that Newcastle grunge of Silverchair in the 90s, and you've got that Fremantle kind of psych rock. Is it geographic, or is it usually people that lead this?
No, I think there is. I think geography does have a role to play here, because when you look at I still remember those early sounds of Astral People. Whether you're looking at artists like the Collarbones, Black Vanilla, Cassius Select, Guare, CK, that was very much on the kind of the weirder electronic R&B sort of tip. And then you go down to a city like Melbourne, which is now just so house and techno orientated, and that's and a lot of the key labels and promoters in that world all live from there as well. So I think geography definitely does have something to play in this, and that's the most amazing thing, right? It's you come to Australia, you've already got this unique side to everything, especially being so isolated and not being so influenced with what's happening with the mainstream overseas. But add to that, within that, you have all these sub pockets, and they're all kind of divided up into different, areas and cities. And it's just, like I said, that whole experience with Berlin, and this was 8 years ago, just changed my whole perception of Australia, and made me appreciate what we have here so much more.
I do remember that after the pandemic, going out on the Gold Coast, because all these clubs had popped up, because Queensland has obviously, been a fair bit more open than the rest of the world. And I was out on the Goldie, and I just couldn't understand what the fuck I was listening to, because it was actually an exodus of Melbourne people playing their shit. And I was like, I've never heard anything like this in Queensland before. It's obviously a bit of a transplant of, Melbourne's north side.
Oh, yeah, the Melbourne sound coming up to the Goldie.
Yeah. What could go wrong? What would you say some of the sounds in Australia that you think are so unique? I mean, what we're seeing, you said you were kind of into grime and drill, early days.
Yeah.
That's obviously been something that's blown up in Australia, in its own mutated Australian version. Have you seen any other sounds like that is so uniquely Australian that end up going big?
Yeah, look, I think a lot of the stuff that was coming out of Melbourne, especially in those last 10 years, the records that labels like Animals Dancing and Butter Sessions were putting out, they were I felt like they had a bit of a quirkier edge to the techno sound. It's almost Australiana meets techno, and I really love that. Yeah, look, obviously we've seen over the last probably 15 years, labels like Modular, when they kind of own that era of cut copy, and like you mentioned before, Tame Impala, Muscles, that was a huge movement as well, the presets. And now we've kind of come into, and then soon after that, it was Future Classic with this more artists like Chet Faker and Flume, and so while it's not completely defined with every label, I feel there's these moments and these kind of anchor points throughout the last 10, 15 years that you can really define as hey, this was the sound of Australia at the time. And right now today we're kind of really going through that at the moment as well. You're seeing there's definitely some big bands that are doing their thing overseas, whether that's the Flume or Tame Impala, Rufus Du Sol, the King Gizzard, the list kind of goes on, and they all sit in their own different pockets. So I can't really say this is the one sound that's working from Australia at the moment, but it's just great to see Australian artists kind of doing headlining festivals overseas. I never thought that I would ever see that in my lifetime.
I feel like you might have a bit of an inside perspective on this, because I've been having a bit of a whinge lately whenever I look at the mainstream big music festivals in Australia. It seems to be that it's a lot of the same headliners and the same acts, and every year if we've got some international acts coming over, they tend to just say yes to every festival. And I feel like in the early 2000s, looking back at things like Big Day Out, we were getting so many international acts, and there was a bit more diverse acts going on. Why do you think that's changed?
Look, I think if I'm being honest and without being brutal, I mean, the death of Triple J has had a huge part to play in this.
Yeah.
That sounded really brutal.
What do you mean?
Obviously, they've kind of, I think that it's fallen off. Before, when Triple J had such a stranglehold on what was big in Australia, whereas that doesn't, since the introduction of Spotify and other DSP streaming platforms, that has gone away. So Triple J had such a stranglehold on these artists, right? And so festivals could often book, especially new up and coming local artists, and they would sell tickets based on the plays that they were getting on Triple J. Unfortunately, that doesn't correlate anymore. So right now, festivals have to fill most of their lineups. You'll notice this more and more with more international artists than Australian artists. And the Australian artists that do make it big, whether it was Gang of Youths last year, it's Ocean Alley this year, these one or two acts that seem to blow up their headline shows, suddenly you'll see them on every single festival, and it's rinse and repeat.
Yeah, right.
And it's a safety net. These festivals are putting up so much money. The cost of touring and just running an event has gone up at least 30 to 40% than pre-COVID. So it is a really tough time to be running a festival, and you've kind of probably seen that reflected in ticket prices across the board as well. So festivals need to kind of know that the international artists that they're booking are proven ticket sellers in the market, or they think they're going to be proven ticket sellers in the market. So I do empathize with them, and I think as well, and this is a great thing that's happened across the board, across the music industry. I guess there's so much more attention being paid to having a gender balanced lineups. That's something that when I first started 12 years ago, that wasn't something that was people were paying a lot of attention to, and to see that happening now is like this amazing thing. But at the same time, there's only so many, there's so few artists in that sort of especially female artists that are selling lots of tickets. So the festivals are all going after these artists as well. So it's this kind of this hard juggle where they're trying to find artists that are going to sell these tickets. They're trying to keep a gender balanced lineup, but there is only such a small pool of these artists that actually exist out there. I know what you're saying.
There's plenty of female artists out there, but we aren't yet at the point where there's female artists with runs on the boards as ticket sellers that would warrant their place on a lineup, so we get the same ones over and over again.
Exactly right. Right. And the ones, and this is a worldwide thing. So you have to understand as well, why would an artist come out here, especially with our Australian dollar being so poor at the moment? why would an artist from the States or Europe come all the way out here, play these shows when they're so in demand worldwide as well, on international festivals? So it is tough, and it's really I don't envy being a festival right now, put it that way.
So it's interesting you're saying you've never seen that many Australian artists headlining overseas festivals, but in the same era, we've seen an effect on the festivals back home. And Triple J and Channel V, I guess, to a degree, back in the day, could just put, there were two channels. There was one on the TV and then one, for kids anyway, there was one on the TV and one on the radio, and they would present sounds to people, and there was no competition, so people wouldn't be like, that what's happening now is there'd be a bunch of kids who once upon a time would have been listening to Triple J go, oh, I like that song, that's a bit different. I mean, there's a whole generation of young women now that are listening to the same 3 Taylor Swift albums over and over again. Why would you do any different? You've got Spotify on your phone and, that's your favourite artist. Back in the day, you weren't really operating like that. And the blokes are the same. There's guys listening to what bands they like. And they're not really getting the opportunity to kind of expand their horizons because we don't have this authority on youth culture like Triple J once was. How are bands cutting through now, and what is your job? What do you do to help bands pop off nowadays when they don't, you can't just slide that CD to the right person who'll get it to Triple J anymore?
Absolutely, and even if you did, it's so interesting. I remember when we first started managing artists in those early days, we used to pop a bottle of champagne every time we got a Triple J ad, because it meant that artist would go on to sell 300 to 500 tickets in every city around Australia like that. One ad. That just does not
really.
That does not. That's the power of that radio station for such a long time. And I remember it was such a brutal process as well, pitching music, because I didn't have we couldn't afford publicists or radio pluggers at the time. So I used to take the CDs myself, and I used to go into Triple J and get my little tag at ABC and walk upstairs and literally be like. And you listen with the head music director. You listen to the music, the song there on a CD, and he'll play it, and then basically tell you to get fucked, or he kind of likes it, and then you hope for the best.
Just watching their face.
It was such a brutal way of doing things, and that's changed so much. So I guess with our artists today, one thing that maybe this is a sad reality, but for us, whenever we're talking to artists, we have to kind of, I guess, let them know the brutal reality of today, and that is that music plays such a small part in this whole picture. You are right. As a music project now, you have to see yourself as a brand and not so much as just like the music side and hope for the best. Like, yes, there might be a couple of like, great stories from that with artists that just kind of want to follow their passion for the music and hope for the best and get picked up. But right now, there's so many other things that come with it that you need to, I guess, have a good grasp on. And that's obviously social media, the digital age, knowing how to communicate to fans. The way that you communicate with them is so important. Building communities with like-minded artists. Those sort of things are so much more important than just, having a good record, because there is so much good music, coming out day to day. There's thousands of songs getting submitted to Spotify every day. Like, what's going to make you stand out? And I guess try to change the perception of like, hey, yes, the music is one part, and it still is, don't get me wrong, it still is the most important part, but there is so many other things that they have to nail as well. And so the artists that we tend to gravitate actually towards is like, okay, if I'm looking at two artists and they've got the exact same record, the ones that I'm going to obviously gravitate towards are the ones that are like kind of got social media down pat, know how to talk to their fans, might have already built up a community of like-minded artists around that project. That's kind of what I'm looking for at the moment, and that's what we're trying to encourage with these artists as well. And it's kind of sad because it's like, for a lot of artists that doesn't come naturally. I mean, a lot of them have just been kind of sitting by themselves in their bedroom studios making music. Yeah. Exactly. Like,
Do you think you can lose a lot of talent? Because I've seen, especially in the age of TikTok, artists like Doja Cat or Lil Nas X, they know what they're doing on TikTok, especially Lil Nas. Like, he used TikTok and Reddit to really pop off. But surely, like, they're extroverted personalities, even like Peach Up, PRC, Australian, she's popped off because of TikTok. Surely there's got to be just some introverted people who don't know how, but are very talented, but they just don't know how to market themselves.
What's this mean for the Bob Dylans of the world?
Yeah, I know, and that's something that we're trying to find out. Look, I like to think in a great world, like, good music will always find its way through. And look, like I said, the right timing, the right label behind you. And I think in the age of just like pure consumption on social media, like, it's the way people discover music. Like, it's the way even like us as a music company promote our music is through digital advertising. So that's where you're consuming things. It's so important to, I guess, find what your pocket is. And like I said, like, if it's not through the social media side of things, it's through like collaboration with other like-minded artists. It's through building a community. It's through like supporting other artists and kind of building a little niche like that. Like, you see like groups of artists taking off. Like, you saw very quickly, like you kind of mentioned earlier there about like, the drill scene in Australia. You saw 1-4 take off, and then suddenly you got Hooligan Hefts and you got like HP Boys, and they kind of take like this whole new wave is kind of set up. And like those sort of scenes do exist, but you kind of have to tie yourself to those scenes to be able to do that. Like I said, there are some beautiful stories of artists kind of just making it, and they're doing their thing and they're doing the minimal promo side of things. But if I'm being honest, that's a very small percentage of the artists that are making it today.
I mean, we all do know that. We understand with streaming, even the consumer understands that there's formulas that are catering to them, whether you're watching TV or whether you're, like obviously Paramount found fire with Yellowstone, right?
Yeah.
Yellowstone struck a chord in the same way this new rise in country music struck a chord. For whatever reason, everyone was,
Sexy cowboys.
Yeah, but I think the idea of great wide open spaces has appealed to a lot of people off the back of the pandemic too. I think Yellowstone and Luke Combs or Brad Cox or whatever. But, you could see once they've found something, we've got 4 different versions of Yellowstone now. We've got different eras. We've got different generations. We've got that kind of stuff too. So we can see, we're being catered to, which was not always the case. Once upon a time, it was, this is something you'll like and you do like it, not because it's been tailored to suit your exact interests at that moment in time. It's something that's weird and, it's good. When was the last time you saw someone on stage, I'd like to think this happened recently, you saw someone on stage and said, that person is going to be enormous no matter what? Because you hear people say it about, particularly in the hip-hop scene, when they first saw the Kid Laroi. I still remember the buzz when that kid, snuck out of the towers in Redfern and got on stage, snuck into a nightclub. Everyone still talks about it. It wasn't that long ago, to be honest. But, that's one example I can think of recently where everyone was like, oh, there's no denying that this is going to be big.
I think there's been 2 artists, if I'm being honest with myself. The first was Genesis Owusu. When I first saw Genesis Owusu, we booked him to support Cosmos Midnight at the time. And it was like they had 2, Cosmos had 2 supports that night. Genesis Owusu was the opener. Half an hour slot. First thing when doors open, he came out with like his whole squad. There was like, he had his 3 dancers there with him. He had his DJ, and it was just like, I looked at that and I was like, mate, you are going to be a megastar. Like, what are you doing? There is no one in this room. And there's like 4 of us. You're getting paid probably $300 and you spend all that and then some for your bandmates and whatnot to make this happen. And I looked at that and I just knew then, and this was probably a few years, probably 5 years ago, and I was like, this guy's going to go somewhere. And look, luckily, we're still involved in the project on the touring side of things, and like seeing his growth and all the ARIA wins and stuff as well earlier has been amazing to watch that growth happen. Another one internationally is Omar Apollo. He's someone that we toured probably, I think, about 3 years ago, and I remember seeing him in the Sydney show at Oxford Art Factory, and I was like, you're going to be a star, and it feels like it's kind of heading that way as well. I'm trying to think about who else kind of really blew my mind. Like, I mean, we toured a lot of big acts, and that's the other thing. That's kind of a bit going back to my point, right? Is like a lot of the big stars that we've toured, I haven't really been left wanting more or thinking that was one of the greatest. Yeah, one of the greatest things I've ever seen. I mean, I think what's in terms of exciting music that I've been seeing is like I was saying about the grime and hip hop side of things. One of the other scenes that we've really been championing a lot is kind of this new UK jazz fusion scene with artists like Yusuf Days and Coco Roco and Alpha Mist, Kamal Williams, and that's, to me, kind of defies what's happening in terms of like a wider sense in the music industry, because those artists, when you look at their streaming data, I mean, these are traditional like kind of jazz fusion artists, like they're not streaming a lot, but for some reason these shows are selling thousands of tickets across a market like Australia. Right. Someone's live music can win. And so going back to your earlier point of like, if you don't have the digital marketing side, if you do not have the social media voice, just make sure your music's fucking good and your live show is even greater, because people have so much less disposable income than ever before. And I've noticed that. Like, and ticket prices are more expensive than ever before. So the people that are, if you're going to part with your money, you want to make sure that you're getting a live experience. And funnily enough, going back to this last point, is like, I've noticed as well, even this year, like when we've toured artists for the, we like, the same artists that we've toured, say like 12 to 18 months ago, if that show wasn't like a standout, blowout, absolute memorable performance, we're finding that, some of those shows this time around, even though there's new music out there, aren't selling as much. And all I can do is really put that down to, I guess, like the quality of the live experience that happened on that debut. Like, is this warranting now people partying with another $70 to $90, from their own income to attend these new shows when they've kind of already, I guess, seen it like a couple of years ago?
It's an interesting time. And like anything, word of mouth also still reigns supreme. Like, you've got your Lil Nas X where everyone heard about it because it felt like in hindsight, it felt like some sort of social media campaign.
It was.
But then you've got your Leon Bridges, you know what I mean? Your Loyal Kanas, who someone told you about. That's how you found them. Like, that's not really something that you could market on social media because it's just not shocking. It's not, it's nice. Where would you see? Obviously you've got the cost of living crisis to worry about, with artists touring. Where do you see the levers that can be pulled to kind of bring this, and I'm not asking you to run for politics here, but to bring us back to a kind of a golden age? Do you think it would be easier if pubs could just open up a beer garden? Do you reckon it would be easier if we could have a concert on Bondi Beach like they did in the 90s?
So all the apartments that you see around venues, get rid of them.
Yeah.
That's pretty much the answer, because right now the issues that venues, especially in New South Wales, but I'm sure across Australia have, is that
noise.
It's the biggest issue. Yeah. There is so much red tape. I mean, I've obviously got friends in the hospitality industry that have tried to open up bars and clubs over the last couple of years in Sydney, and it's honestly a nightmare. It's a nightmare process when I hear about what they have to go through and how much pushback they get and all the hoops they've got to jump through. That this does not foster a culture of supporting live music whatsoever. If anything, it's quite the opposite, because then as well, what's happening is because the costs are so high of running these venues and to set up these venues have to make sure that these artists that are coming through their venues are ticket sellers, are headliners, are internationals. This same sort of philosophy applies to the festivals that we kind of spoke about earlier. There is no culture for these younger local artists to really come through. I mean, I'm a Sydney boy, and the last great venue that was supporting, I guess, new bands coming through Australia and marketing them and giving them a leg up, and they gave our artists a big leg up in those early days, was Good God Small Club. But since that point, if I'm being honest, like, there's just not really many avenues for new local artists to come through unless they come out of the gates firing on Spotify, on radio, and and it's really hard for them to kind of get their start. Whereas and even now, where like I said, like these venues are so dependent on big artists to kind of fill these rooms, like the timings of these venues have changed so much as well. The idea of staying out late now in Sydney is doesn't really happen with the younger generation. They don't really know how to stay out late. Like they get to, now I notice that.
Well, also they can't afford it.
Yeah, oh, totally. And I notice as soon as a headline is finished now, like say like 12:30, 1 a.m., the room's empty. So those slots afterwards that would normally be reserved for smaller up and coming artists to kind of nurture them and to kind of push them up to the next level, they're not really getting to play to anyone either, because people just don't have to, people don't have the capacity to stay out late anymore.
Well, they don't have the stamina. I guess lockout laws going into a pandemic probably did that. We've got a Gen Y or Gen Z right now, I guess, who aren't familiar with the dark arts and aren't familiar with night walking as a generation before them.
I was talking to one of our younger interns actually the other day, and I think he's 24, and I just realised he was kind of talking to me. He was like, Vic, I've never been out in a club in Sydney past 1:30, and I was just like, what? Yeah. You're 24, and to think about what I got up to when I was kind of like, between that 18 to 24 bracket, and like that's it. Like, and they're just not used to kind of like being out late, and therefore there's fewer slots for artists to play, and therefore venues need more money in a shorter amount of time, so they book bigger artists, and it's kind of this cyclical effect. So
it's an interesting one. I mean, it is easy, as we said before, there's levers you could pull, you could change the culture, and then it's obviously in a government's best interest to get a 24-hour economy going coming out of a pandemic that wasn't that long ago. It would be interesting to see. You could, if we could just, first of all, legislate against anyone who lives in a nightlife precinct from making noise complaints. That would probably help things. And you're starting to see those 4 a.m. licenses come back across the cities. You're obviously running the ball up on behalf of a lot of people, your artists and also the kids now, because, we're all concerned about the kids, that they don't know what it's like to... They don't know what it's like
to party.
They don't know what it's like to walk out to the sunrise.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
See the seagulls.
What's happening this summer? It's going to be a scorching summer.
Yep.
What have you got planned?
So, mate, we're bringing back our outdoor series Summer Dance, and look, call us crazy. Like I remember when we used to run this series, it was an outdoor party. We used to do them all across the summers. Summer Dance. We've been running it for about 5 years. We got to a point where things were going in a different direction with the company. We were kind of, like I said before, we were kind of entering more live touring concert space. And then what happens is I became a dad this year. And I was like, and when you become a dad, you kind of look inwards a little bit and you're like, hey, what made us? And what do I want to do for me again? Because I've got this amazing company and I'm so proud of it. And we've been kicking so many goals on different fronts. But I also just like to dance in the sun.
Yep.
And I feel like Sydney's made for that, right? Yep. Like when you think of Sydney, like why aren't there more outdoor parties? So this might be a stupid decision, it might be a great decision, but look, we're bringing back the series, and I want my baby boy's first dance to be at this party. And so it'll be across the summer period, running from October all the way through to the end of March, probably about 9 to 10 parties in total. We've got some great internationals, some great local artists playing across there. It'll be the entertainment centre across the series. So yeah, look, really looking forward to that. But besides that, heaps of tours, there's heaps of festivals that are happening that we're touring artists for. Heaps of shows, and I hope it is a good summer. And I hope what I am looking forward to is just the I am looking forward to hopefully the market correcting itself a little bit, because I feel like post COVID we all came out and there was this huge boom. All our tools were smashing, and I was like, "This is easy. Yeah. Like this is a walk in the park." And so what every other promoter did across the country was just book more stuff and heaps more stuff and set up new festivals and new entities. And what we're seeing this year is that some things are working and some things aren't. Yep. And I feel like by next year, that's when the market kind of corrects itself. And what I'm looking forward to the most is the people the artists that lost the most post COVID. Sadly, were local artists because people felt like, especially here in Australia, I've already seen those bands before during COVID time in some weird seated setting or whatever, and so I want to see internationals. I want fresh. I want exciting. I want internationals, and so international touring boomed. Local artists were not doing the same numbers that they were doing pre-COVID. So what I'm finding that's happening now, those local artists are slowly coming back. Some of the international tours are slowly declining, and then we're kind of settling on this sort of market correction that's about to take place. So I'm looking forward to that, hopefully taking place over the summer and into next year as well.
Well, you've put the word out there. Anyone who's coming to Sydney, over our listeners coming to Sydney, for whatever reason, could be the cricket, it could be a sporting event, or it just could be to see friends and family. Make sure you suss out one of these summer sessions. Where are you going to be hosting them?
Exactly. So we're going to the entertainment quarter in Moore Park. We've got the Coach Bay at Liberty Hall, where we're going to be doing day sessions from 3 p.m. to 9 p.m. And then we're going inside into Liberty Hall to dance until the early morning from 9 p.m. onwards. So hopefully you guys can stay out. I'll do my best to try and keep you out there for as long as possible, but we'll see how we go.
We'll have to come down for a look, mate.
Yeah, we'd love to have you.
Thanks for joining us, Vichara.
Mate, loved it. Thanks for having me.
Powered to live music and touring. It's going to correct itself. It's coming back. Sorry if you just bought yourself a Meriden shitbox in the inner city.